Welcome to my podcast, to the Austen Tayshus podcast. Phillip Frazer, and for people who don't know, Phillip has just been to Uluru. Not a lot of people know this, and he found the last resting place of Edmund Barton inside the Ayers Rock. We don't know that it is a tomb. Ayers Rock is a tomb for Edmund Barton, and some Aboriginal elders as well. Actually, well, I'm not sure which is which, but political correctness is what this show is all about. Anyway, so I wanted to start with where you come from. So
we had a tour guide whose name is Sammy Uluru.
Oh, really?
And he is a descendant of the family. That's the family name, and the family's the name taken when they reclaimed the whole area to the original communities.
Yeah. So
he was pretty cool. First, I thought he was a bit slow and old, like me, but then he got. I realized he's a very canny, tactical sort of fella, the sort of guy who could negotiate back the ownership of Uluru from the Australian government and the Northern Territory.
Well, it's about time. It's about time. It's about time.
No kidding.
Where did you go? Did you go right around the base of the rock? You can't climb the rock at the moment, can you?
No. That's part of the deal he made with the white fellas was no more climbing the rock, right? So we walked around the rock. Yeah, did that. Yeah. And
that would have taken quite a long time. How long did it take?
It's only about 12K. So
12K. Well, still that's a walk.
Yeah.
That's from here to Double Bay. But so was it a group of people or just yourselves?
For that one, we went in a little tour group. I've only been on in a tour group about 3 times in my life. The first one was one I actually led into the jungles of northern Cambodia in 1968.
Really?
That was fun. Yeah.
And did you encounter Pol Pot or any of those guys? Or?
Well, we didn't see a single person up around Angkor Wat except for a 7-year-old kid. But I suspect there were 8,000 Khmer Rouge lurking in the jungle wondering what the fuck we were doing there.
Well, but they left you alone because otherwise we wouldn't be doing this podcast.
Yeah, no, they had not yet sharpened their machetes.
Well, that's a good thing. And did you bump into Jane Fonda? Or?
Not there.
But you did? You did bump into Jane Fonda?
Later on in California.
Yeah, and with Tom Hayden or with...
with Tom and me.
Tom and I are like this. So anyway, Phil, so let's start. So you're a Melbourne boy, aren't you?
Yeah, born in Melbourne, grew up there, and what did I do? I left and went to Sydney for a while.
In the early 60s. In the early 60s.
Mid 60s, late 60s actually.
Yeah.
In the mid 60s, I went to Monash, studying to be a doctor actually.
Really?
Yeah, that didn't work out. I got much more interested in running the campus newspaper, the Lot's Wife, it's called.
Yeah.
For complicated reasons.
Yeah.
Then I got to realize that what I liked was not medicine at all, but newspapers.
Well, I have a similar thing because I started dentistry and went into photography and then film school. Anyway, right. So your interest in publishing and newspapers came from Lot's Wife, came from working on the university.
Well, actually, I remember as about 15 at high school, Blackburn High School, the famous high school these days, but back then it was a couple of sheds inside of a cherry orchard. Anyway, I remember discovering a formula you could make in a cake tray out of your mum's, kitchen cupboard with all kinds of terrible chemicals in it. But what it basically did was make a jelly-like substance. And if you wrote things on a page with a certain kind of ink and then put that page with your handwriting on the jelly, peeled it off again, you could make dozens and dozens of copies. So I started a little, block newspaper for me and the mates, all 3 of them. This was, way back when I was 12 or 13, something like that. So Lot's Wife was next in my
Lot's Wife was next, and did you interview a lot of people? Did you interview people for that magazine?
Not so much. Well, did I interview people? No, probably not. I mean, student newspapers were places for, wanking by people like me who wanted to be news editors.
I mean, it was a political upheaval. So at that stage and whatever.
That's true. I mean, and like all political upheavals, it was driven in part by history and in part by just technological change. The mid 60s was when the corporate printing world discovered offset printing, which you're no longer making type and pictures out of lumps of molten metal, lead and other terrible things, the way we did for centuries. You're basically printing off of a photograph. So we discovered that there was a place in Melbourne that had bought one of these new offset web presses. We engaged them to print the Lot's Wife newspaper and realized that we could make images of absolutely anything. It used to cost you a fortune if you just wanted to have a photograph of somebody in your newspaper, because they had to make a metal block of the image.
Yeah, well, I remember that. I remember that, and I get so intrigued. I was so intrigued because it's such a complicated process, so they could turn it around overnight. They can make a giant newspaper so quickly
with all those crazy wooden blocks, and then
amazing,
with metal on top. And then the next day they melt them all down and start again.
Amazing.
But with offset, you basically just any image you could find, photograph, hand drawing, whatever the hell it was, you could put it in the paper. So this was, in my insight, was that this was the first time ever that a picture was cheaper than 1,000 words.
Yeah.
So we went into put into Lot's Wife massive amounts of graphics because we could. That's why.
Yeah.
So that was exciting. And at the end of 1 year of doing that, I realized on summer holes that we could maybe make commercial use of this technology we just learned how to use. And my fellow editor of Lot's Wife, mate I shared a flat with, Tony Schäuble by name, he said, let's do a newspaper about rock and roll and the top 40 and all that shit. Tony didn't know the Beatles from the Rolling Stones, but he knew there was a market of brewing here. So in a space of a few weeks, we put out the first issue of a weekly tabloid color newspaper for teens and 20s, as we said on the front cover.
And that was called Go Set, right? And Go Set, but there was no competition to Go Set anywhere in Australia at that time. We're talking 67, 68, something like that.
66, January 66. First
so
week
there was no other paper like that in the whole country.
And there was really no other paper in the world because of that sort, because we were doing this rock and roll stuff and fashions for grubby little teenagers like we were. Actually, I was 19 at the time. And we owned the thing, we edited it, we sold ads, we got on the radio getting free commercials, trading the back page of the magazine for airtime on 3UZ or 3KY or whatever, 2SM all over the country.
Yeah.
And before the first year was over, we were out selling Time magazine. This was like 50,000 copies a week across Australia.
Really? That's incredible.
And 23 full-time employees, all of us, only one person of that 23 mob was over the age of 23.
And the rock and roll scene in Australia, you're talking about the Easy Beats and Glenn Wheatley, those, and Glenn Shorrock, those sort of people.
Like I said, we made Tony, when he came up with this proposition, it was a one-liner. Let's start a rock and roll newspaper. My job was to do the rest, actually make it happen.
Yeah.
So, but he, the time, Melbourne was the time of the Easy Beats. It was the first issue featured a touring artist from England named Tom Jones. And fuck me, that guy's still touring today. Amazing. Well, but I'm still here too. That's amazing.
That's right. That's right.
It was my Uluru was my 75th birthday party. So
Well, good on you. As we say, as the Jewish people say, till 120. So that's another 40 years or something. So you're good.
Yeah,
good
no worries.
Good luck. But I just read an article yesterday that said that we'll be living till 200 very shortly. So anyway, so Ghost Set. And how long did Ghost Set last for?
7 years.
7 years, right. And
I bailed out after about 5.5 years, something like that. Well, I didn't bail out. I was thrown off the ship, basically.
Why was that?
Because in the course of those years, from 66 up till 71, say, this new revolution was happening. The first one being, both the offset press technological thing, but also and electrified music, but also, the market. People like me, again, my age group, had grown up from Johnny Farnham and Ronnie Charles and all these, Olivia Newton-John and these other artists that were Australia's top sellers at the time, Billy Thorpe, Max Merritt. By 68 or 69, we had a split. We had the older teenagers or young 20s group who wanted to hear, some heavier shit, some really loud and aggressive music, some really interesting lyrics. Bob Dylan had, taken over trashed the folk scene with electric guitars and shit. So there were really two markets: the pop, bubblegum, pretty little. I want to hold your hand music on the one hand, that was Go Set, and then there was the the new gritty, grimy, fuck you, rebellious music. So I put out another magazine on the Go Set label, so to speak, called Revolution. Very modest ambitions here, you see. And that got us into all kinds of trouble because we kept saying politically wild and crazy shit, but also saying fuck and other things in print that were not quite yet acceptable to the powers that be in Victoria, let alone, Queensland or other parts of the country.
Yeah.
So we kept getting taken to court for obscenity, but obscenity was really a front. That was a way they shut you up if you were being cheeky on more profound levels like politics. So.
Well, I've had my own share of that. I've been to
yeah, I'd say you were.
Well, no, I've fought many cases. In fact, in Queensland, they call my act the judge called my act the filthy, disgusting ravings of a mindless, depraved human being.
Geez, that's pretty good, mate.
Yeah, that was pretty good. And that's what I said. I said, yeah, absolutely spot on, mate. But he was a Joe Bajoki Peterson lackey, that guy.
Yeah, right. Well, he probably called most people that.
Hey?
Anyway, he probably called most people that in that case.
That's right. So
filthy, depraved, and all those things.
Yeah.
Self-description, I'm sure, in fact.
Yeah, but that was happening all over Australia. That was still in the '80s. That was the beginning of the '80s when I started, and when I was touring around with Rodney Rood and people like that.
If you look, one of the curious facts of history is that the ruling class likes to beat people up for being, cheeky about sex or about bodily functions, that kind of thing, because they think they can get you on a sort of higher ground and beat you up morally. But in fact, they're usually doing it because they're scared you're going to get political and expose them, pull the green curtain back and show the world who they really are.
And they're all fucking animals on the side anyway, So
we are absolutely.
Well, I mean, all those politicians, that's what they're doing, All those,
okay. Well,
all the grumpy old men, are always, they're always hypocrites.
But there's nothing wrong with being a fucking animal. We all are.
Well, that's right. Or fucking.
But you're talking about what sort of pricks they are, really.
Yeah, that's right.
I like that quote from the Joe Bielke Peterson guy describing you. But my first, or the court case that broke my relationships with Gosset was that we published a like 2-inch piece in the back of one issue which was an excerpt from Abby Hoffman's book called Steal This Book, right? Abby's book about, protesting the system by screwing it. So this little 2-inch piece told you tips on how to live for nothing off the system. Things like pay toilets, crawl under the door, well, duh, how revolutionary could you get, right? So, but one of the tips was in the supermarket, and this was written for an American audience, so there's a slight cultural difference. In the supermarket, and you go to the record album department of the supermarket and pick up 3 or 4 albums you want. Then go to the frozen pizza department, pick up a frozen pizza, slip open the cover, slide all the records inside the pizza box, and go to the checkout counter, which was funny, right?
Yeah, so sure, of course.
This was it. Unfortunately for us, or fortunately for history, perhaps, the 2 of our dedicated Gosset readers were the daughters of the Melbourne Victorian chief secretary, they call them. They were the chief cop, basically.
Yeah.
And this bloke saw this one piece in it with his, dear teenage daughters were reading this sort of shit in this pop newspaper. So I was visited by the vice squad, or whatever they're called, and told that I was to be taken to court on a charge of inciting diverse persons unknown to commit larceny at supermarkets.
Well, it's not as good as mine, but it's good.
Yeah, no, I thought, thanks. I'll take second place on that.
But all you were doing is promoting Abby Hoffman, though, weren't you?
Were we? We were actually. We were doing it. It was again this division in the market, the teen and young 20s group. This was a page actually about useful things that kids who've left home and are living rough might want to know. So we really were inciting precisely what they said.
So did it go to court or not?
Yeah, it did.
And how did you go?
Well, it went to what they call a committal hearing, which is where the magistrate decides if you've got some case to answer.
Yeah.
And he didn't listen to any of my impassioned and eloquent political statements. He just said, "Yeah, committed to trial."
Oh, really?
So on bail with $200 bail.
Really?
As of now, so I was carted away.
Yeah. And
hours later, I had to get a mate to bail me out because the printing company that printed our Gossets had essentially taken control because we owed them so much money. And they were just not happy with this court case at all, let alone paying my bail for it. So they basically did a fuck you to me and said, don't come to the office. So I went away and did what I was about to do anyway, unbeknownst to them, which was launch the Australian edition of Rolling Stone.
Right. But you'd met Jan Wenner before, prior to that, hadn't you?
Yeah. I went over there and met him. Rolling Stone started about 2 or 3 years later after Gosset had, but obviously it was pitched at that other part of the older part of that market, the smarty pants 20-year-olds, like 22-year-olds like I was then. Yeah.
So the 68 was 68, 69. That was Woodstock, and so you started Rolling Stone Australia in which year? 71 was it, or 72?
It was actually the very last days of 71, but it hit the newsstand in the beginning of 72. Yeah.
And it was an immediate success, wasn't it?
Well, actually, it was an immediate disaster.
Oh, was it?
First instance, because I'd made a deal with a bloke everybody knows, dear old Rupert Murdoch.
Right.
See, when I wanted to bail out of Gosset, I had talked to him about whether he wanted to buy it, and he said maybe. He was, some of his interstate operations were doing our distribution for Gosset, so he had a very clear idea of its commercial, numbers, and it looked good to him financially. So we were about to start arguing about the price when he said, "Now wait, before we go any further, how long are you personally going to commit to continuing on as editor/publisher?" And I said, "Oh, you mean working for you?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Forget about it." And he said, "Meaning?" I said, "I'm not going to stay beyond the day we make this deal." And he said, "Okay, meeting over. Nice talking to you."
That was the end
So
of
I said,
that.
that was the end of that. So then when I got the Rolling Stone thing going, his minions, his middle level people agreed, yeah, sure, we'll distribute it, because it's very, as we all know, if you ever did Karl Marx 101, you've got production and you've got distribution, and you need to be in control of both if you're going to win the revolution, right?
Yeah.
So, but we did have our own distribution company in Victoria, but not nowhere else. And there are a couple of independents who distribute you if you're a bit risque on one level or another. Anyway, so we had this deal to that Murdoch's presses would print Rolling Stone and distribute. So this happened. They printed the first issue, the Australian edition, and we had a big press media event planned the next day at the place called the Yellow House in Sydney.
Yeah.
To launch Rolling Stone Australia, and after that, the same, I think, at Montserrat in Melbourne for the Victorian media. So on the day before the launch, I get the phone call from some bloke, never heard of him, at Murdoch's printing company, and he says, "Hey mate, we're printing this Rolling Stone thing of yours." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we can't put this out on the street." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, it says fuck 25 times on the first 5 pages." And I said, "And it's talking about hash pipes and all kinds of shit." And I said, "No shit, I guess you didn't read all the past issues we gave you in the first place, did you?" So he said, no, we can't fucking have anything to do with this. We're a fucking family-friendly company." Okay, it's a waste of time talking to you. Hung up. And the problem was, though, that we had this launch party. Now, I had a fair idea of another printer who might print it, but I needed to, I had all these people coming to get drunk for our party, newspaper guy. So I needed copies to hand out, but that he just shut the door. They'd printed 20,000 copies. They were just pulping.
Really?
The Murdoch's people.
So
I'm sitting around with all the brightest people I know, trying to figure out how to get something going here overnight, basically, for the media launch. I mean, mate, Tez Cleary, who was he sold ads, but he was really the house jester, the court jester. He vanished from the room, and about half an hour later, he comes in with a bundle, great heavy bundle of copies of Rolling Stone. I said, "Where the fuck did you get that?" He said, "I just drove down to the printing company, drove out the back to the loading dock, and said to the workers lounging around having a smoke." I said, you know that thing Rolling Stone you printed and it's now gone in the dumpsters? It's going to be pulped." And they said, "Yeah, it's in the tip bin over there." And I said, "Well," and Tez said, "Well, I got in the boot here, I got 4 slabs of Victoria Bitter. You take the slabs, I'll take 4 of those bundles." They said, "You're on."
No problem.
So we had something to show people at the media events, but I still had to get a new printer and new distributors overnight, which we did basically.
So, but how was the media event? So that was Martin Sharp involved with that, and Richard Neville, etc. And
yeah, Martin was, of course, the man behind the Yellow House in Sydney.
Yeah.
An artists live in and exhibit place.
And did you have much to do with the Yellow House prior to that, or with Martin?
No, because I mean, I knew Martin and Richard Neville and so on just a little bit, and they knew me but there's the old Melbourne-Sydney divide. Even though Ghost had sold extremely well in New South Wales, of course, at that stage we hadn't quite. Well, Richard and the Oz mob and me had not yet got to know each other well.
Right.
But nevertheless,
But
Yeah,
you did subsequently, did you? Did you subsequently?
oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
You had a lot to do with Richard and Marty and
More Richard than anybody
right,
in
right,
that group.
right.
But it was fascinating that, they're just a couple of years older than I was. So, and they were a bit sus about me, like Melbourne, bad thing. Rock and roll, well, that's not really the center of the universe, is it?
Right.
And I was also much more directly political than they were.
Right, right.
In any event, we had the event at the Yellow House, and all these Sydney trendy, wonderful people showed up, including Germaine Greer, who had landed virtually the day before to promote her new book called Female Eunuch.
That's amazing.
So it was a successful event.
She would have gone in the first issue, though, had you known that she would be coming, wouldn't she have?
If I had known.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. But you didn't know that.
Yeah.
That would have been a coup for you.
Well, 2 weeks later, I'd moved to Sydney because I knew it was time I got to know Sydney. And a friend of mine in Sydney who was already a, well-known, well-established rebel girl by the name of Liz Fell. She found me a beautiful terrace house in Paddington that was for rent from a mate of hers, cheap. So I rented that, moved in there, and then Liz calls me up and said, "Hey, that house I set you up in, it's got a spare bedroom." And I said, "Yeah, so what?" She said, "Well, Germaine needs a room." So I've been there about 10 days, and I've now got a roommate, forced upon me by the name of Germaine Greer.
That's amazing.
And we had a ball just talking to each other, mind you. I mean, she had 14 blokes she was chasing around Sydney or the world, really. And I had plenty of trouble on my own account. So we come home from a day or a night's out on the town doing our stuff and kind of compare notes, like one time I remember waking up in the morning and coming out to the kitchen, and she left a note that said, this Robert Plant gave me this. Enjoy, but don't be greedy. And it's on top of the wardrobe or something, and there's a huge bag of Buddha sticks or whatever the fuck it was, top level pot. So that went on for a couple of months before she went back to England. And in that period of time, Rolling Stone was well and truly up and running.
On its feet. And so who was the subsequent publisher then? Who became the publisher?
After I did, you mean? Or?
No, sorry. No, but Rupert Murdoch pulled out. So who took over?
Oh, the printing.
Sorry, who took over printing?
Yeah. The printer in Melbourne was a place called Stockland Press, which its masthead is sort of the ship was a weekly farming newspaper called Stock and Land.
Right.
That have been around for 100 years for farmers. And the middle-aged man, he was only probably 40 something, but I thought he was this old bloke who owned it. I went and saw him, and he looked at my Rolling Stone thing, and he said, "Well, yeah, this guy's sitting behind the desk. He's got a double-breasted suit on. His hair's covered in, held with brill cream and part right down." And he's about this wide in the shoulders. And he used to play full back from Melbourne in the AFL or VFL as it was back then, by the name of Mike Woods. So Mike sits back and looks at this thing and says, "Well, yeah, we can print 20,000 of them by tomorrow. You'll have to find your own distribution, but we can take care of that." I mean, we're going to have to do something about all these fucks and things, but, we'll work something out. So for a while, we used to just white out the U or one of those stupid things you had to do. It was incredibly fiddly job to go through, blotching. And all you do is make the fucks all stand out on the page, right? Yeah. Mike, after a few months, Mike said, fuck it, just leave all in,
That's good. That's good.
He was
a progressive footballer.
Wonderful man, yeah. Actually, he not only played VFL, he'd gone to England at the end of the war, Second World War.
Andrew? Yep. Sorry, that's all right. You just froze for a second, so I just thought.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
How's the
he
weather
learned
down
how to
there?
play.
Yeah.
He learned how to play rugby as well, and he played for both the Victorian team in AFL and the Victorian rugby squad as well.
That's unusual.
Only bloke to do that.
Yeah. So Rolling Stone's on its feet and it's moving, and you've got to, because I'd reached maturity at that stage too, so I knew about Rolling Stone, and it was a great publication. So it was that and Playboy, Playboy and Rolling Stone. No, but I Playboy for the articles, of course, as they say, you know.
Of course.
But I was just lamenting how, because he was so great too, that guy, that Hugh Hefner, he was so great, and he was, it was. I mean, I was watching Playboy After Dark. Have you ever watched that? Did you ever watch that series in America?
Yeah, I almost never watched television in those years at all. My mum and dad wouldn't buy a television set because they said it was full of shit or trash or junk or whatever.
But Playboy After Dark was good.
Yeah. No, I was aware of all that TV. And in a weird way, Jan Wenner, the guy who started Rolling Stone, was not that much of a rebellious hippie himself. He was more like son of Hugh Hefner.
Right.
He adopted the looks,
the
manners of our generation, but he was a businessman like Hugh.
Well, Hugh was a businessman, but he knew what was going on politically, and he knew what was going on culturally, and he was switched on. He was a swithed on guy. And
absolutely.
He also had some beautiful girls hanging around, which can you say that now or not? You allowed to say that? Can you mention that?
Well, my thoughts on that is, you looked at the beautiful girls allegedly that he had in Playboy, and they all looked like something made with airbrushes, really. And
well, they did, but I can assure you they were gorgeous. And can you say that or not? Are you allowed to say that or not? Can we say that? Is that okay? Can we say that? Are we allowed to say that? But anyway, I thought it was a great publication, and it opened my eyes to Norman Mailer, etc. So.
Yeah, right. After they'd been opened by the centerfold girl in the first place. Yeah. No, he did good. He ran some good stuff, definitely. And even crazy Larry Flint, who came a few years later with that
Hustler.
Even worse, more politically incorrect magazine, Hustler, right?
Yeah.
He broke some barriers through on the intellectual level, shall we say, or at least on the literary level.
Well,
it
ended up in a wheelchair, and I met him when he was in the wheelchair once.
Yeah, right.
In the Four Seasons. But so how do you feel about? Well, how do you feel about that whole thing with the women and thing, and the with the way they portrayed women, the objectification of women? How do you feel about that?
Well, who's they in that sense?
Well, whatever's going on, who's organising the social mores right now? I mean, it's okay.
So there's the key. Back then, with Hugh Hefner and all that, they who portrayed women in certain ways meant the white men. With money. That's the
patriarchy. The patriarchy.
Absolutely. So the insight of second wave feminism that this has got to stop, it was absolutely correct. That is to say, the patriarchy of white males has had its day. It's been in charge for a couple of centuries, and it's had a huge impact, made all sorts of good things, but it's also fucked us up, fucked up the planet, screwed anybody who wasn't one of them. Time to break the lock they have on everything, and that's still going on. We're still free.
That's your mate Rupert. That's your mate Rupert again, isn't it?
It's what?
Well, it's your mate Rupert. Yeah. Talking about climate change and his attitude towards climate change. And I know you're a huge advocate. Yeah. I know you're a huge advocate. So.
Yeah. Well, Murdoch, I think, is a fascinating asshole. I mean, my theory is that everything he's done has really been almost purely a fuck you gesture to the world, to everybody else on the planet but him. He understood how, if you devote yourself solely and completely to exploiting the worst and meanest and thinnest instincts of humankind.
You make a
You
fortune.
can sell and make a fucking fortune.
Yeah.
And stay alive, for Christ's sake. How did he do that? I don't know. I mean,
Well, it certainly worked in America, didn't it? It certainly worked in America.
well, it worked here and it worked in England.
But it worked totally to his advantage.
Absolutely.
In America, I mean, just beyond his wildest dreams, probably.
But my overall position on the political correctness, as we used to call it, is that most of it was actually correct, and also on the current, being woke and all that stuff, I think is also part of the painful process of taking those rich white blokes, pulling them off their pedestals, chucking them in the garbage bin of history. Good thing.
Sure. But did you watch the Academy Awards the other day? I mean, there wasn't one moment of humour in there whatsoever. So
and
from my perspective, hey?
Whose fault was that? The women? You're blaming the women?
No, I'm not blaming the women. I'm just wondering whether it's going too far, all this stuff, whether the cancel culture thing is just going too far.
Yeah, I hate the word cancel culture, but whatever. Counter-culture, cancel culture.
Whatever you want to call it. I mean, what's happened is you've got rid of that you're getting rid of the patriarchy, but you're also
we haven't finished the job yet.
Well, I know you haven't, but how far is it going to go there? How far will it go? So, in my business, I mean, I'm a stand-up comedian, and my thing is tearing it all down and rebuilding it, or whatever it is, but having a go, really punching at it, and it's severely limited now. I don't really give a fuck. I just say what I feel, and I don't think that I've ever been politically incorrect. I think that I've just pushed boundaries. But
or alternatively, I'd say you may have always been politically incorrect, in that could be seen as a badge of honor as well. But you got to work out how to make it funny. But that's not my job.
Well, but it's they're worried about making it funny at the expense of somebody, it's some victim or whatever it is. So I'm a victim myself. Whatever it is, whatever's going on right now. I mean, they is those that are opposed to the patriarchy right now.
But even that mob, the people who are opposed to the patriarchy, which is a huge percentage of the populations of the world, come in infinite varieties. I mean, there are people who, in America particularly, it's a country full of about 350 different cultures, and they vary, So, and it's always in transition. My position, though, is that the biggest of all crises we face is not just climate change, but the whole messing with the natural environment, which is we've now managed to change the natural environment of the Earth, something we never really thought we'd ever do. That was impossible, we thought. And now it not only is possible, but we've done it. And it's on an exponential trajectory, which means that, we're facing the extinction of our species quite simply and literally in the next 50 years if we don't.
Well, ScoMo doesn't think so.
Does he? Just stop that sentence halfway. ScoMo doesn't think. The guy's a fuckwit.
He's a total fuckwit. That's right. But and he represents that the patriarchy. He represents Rupert Murdoch.
He's a lapdog of those guys. Yes.
He wants to stay there. I guess he wants to stay in power.
Well, I mean, the system is owned and operated by the corporates, but there are different corporates. He himself is managed by the fossil fuels companies of the oil, gas, and so on, and he'll be knocked off possibly by somebody who represents something else, the banks. I mean, back in the States, when I went to the States after, by the way, after Rolling Stone was a success, I launched an Australian counterculture paper called The Digger, which was really the one I wanted to do all along. I was really basically doing Rolling Stone in order to fund The Digger. And in that one, we really did come all guns blazing against the establishment and did a lot of interesting stuff. But that was also brought down by too many lawsuits, and printers who wouldn't print it distributed.
It was pre-Nation Review, wasn't it, or was it the same time?
No. It was contemporaneous. It was right alongside Nation Review.
But it was more vindictive, though, wasn't it?
Well, I wouldn't say vindictive. The Nation Review.
Informative.
The people who put out Nation Review were guys with, leather arm patches on their jackets and smoking pipes.
Yeah.
People who put out the Digger had hair down to their navels, male and female, and smoking joints. So it was just a slightly different demographic. Okay.
Yeah,
so then I went to the States and basically to find out what I could find out about what role the Americans had played in the dismissal of the Whitlam government. But in the course of being there, I was only going to stay for a few months, and I wound up staying for 37 and a half years. But early on, not early, towards the end of those years, really, I met a fabulous guy from Texas by the name of Jim Hightower, who had been tried to be a politician. He was a successful politician in Texas with a very progressive worldview, but that's kind of oxymoronic, right? Texas and progressive politics, he would have thought. But the George Bush family mob realized that Hightower was a dangerous rival to their, barrier to their politics. So they basically let him know that he'd be screwed if he didn't, get out of the way. So he, as he put it, he abandoned politics for the second most reviled occupation on the planet, journalism. So he wanted to put out a newsletter or something like that with his own political views, and at the time he wanted to do that. I was in New York still, and I wanted to put out a newsletter about American politics as well. And somebody who knew both of us put us together, and on the phone. And Hightower said to me, "So, in your newsletter, Philip, what are you gonna do? That's what are you gonna talk about? How are you gonna do this? How are you gonna express your?" I said, "Well, the first thing, Jim, I'm going to do is we stop calling the members of Congress by these regions that they allegedly represent and call them by what they really are." So John McCain is not the senator for Arizona, really. John McCain is the senator for the information companies, the telecommunications industry. And in Delaware is not represented by Senator Joe Biden. Senator Joe Biden represents the credit card companies who are based in Delaware. So every time we refer to a member of Congress, we'll refer to who they actually represent.
Right.
It's still representative democracy, but there's the idea that they're representing the people is horseshit.
Right. Yeah. So that magazine lasted for a week, did it?
No, he said to me, finish a bit of it, and I'll tell you how it lasted. This was 1999, we're having this conversation. So he said to me, "Well, that's interesting. I just did a radio show and I'm calling for every member of Congress to have all their logos on their jackets like NASCAR race drivers do, so we know who we're dealing with." And I said, "Okay, Jim, sounds like we're on the same page." So we launched that newsletter.
What was it? What did you call it? Something?
Well, he had a certain amount of fame, Jim did, so he got his name, and it's a good name, Hightower. It's a great name.
It is, yeah.
So I said, "Jim, let's call it the Hightower Lowdown." And he said, that's good. And I learned to be able to, talk and write in he was
vernacular.
a amusing politician, the only one I ever saw in America who could actually make an audience laugh.
Really?
And he's still around, and he did warm-up acts for Bernie Sanders. In any event, Jim and I put out the Hightower Lowdown there at last few months of 1999 as a monthly, and it's still going today. It was the most successful publication I ever did.
So somebody come at you though? People come at you or not?
Yeah, but in America, it's a goddamn free-for-all. So you've got to really, 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 really pull the rug out from some powerful people before they come and crush you.
Right.
But they will if you do that. So perhaps we failed in that we didn't make anybody shoot us.
So So you're in America, and you're putting this thing out in the beginning of the 21st century, and so you continue to work in journalism for the last 20 years in America.
Well, I continued doing the Hightail Lowdown. I also put out my own newsletter about environment called News on Earth. Believe it or not, that name not yet registered to anybody, and so I did those.
It's a good name. It's a good name.
Yeah, I still own it.
News on Earth.
Yeah, give me a ring if you want to own the URL. So then we, then came 9/11, the crash bombing of the World Trade Tower, which was only about less than a kilometre away from my house, my apartment. And I thought, well, shit, all those years ago I came to America to find out what, have a fight with what America did to Australia in helping topple the Whitlam government back in the day. So that was my fight with America, and the reason I went there, to get inside the belly of the beast and figure out what the fuck they were doing. But here comes 9/11. I think, Jesus Christ, I nearly got, blown up. And my kids, I had 2 kids and a wife at that stage by then. So I thought, I don't want to be, I got an argument with America, but I don't want to be collateral damage in someone else's argument with America. So I set in motion the process of getting out of New York, getting out of America, and coming back here. So in 2010, I landed in, I also decided I'd come back and live in the Byron Bay hinterlands, which I'd never been to in my life back in the day, because I was always too putting out a newspaper.
Well, why did it take you 9 years to get out of New York?
A marriage that I had to disentangle from.
Right.
I had to wind up my apartments and friendships and the lowdown, make sure Jim had people around him who could continue putting it out successfully. Sort of housekeeping, Plus the marriage had dissolved, and I met a gal that I'd first met in 1971, and she'd had a marriage and I'd had a marriage, and we decided we'd pick up where we left off. So Kate and I live up in Mullumbimby these days.
So, and Mullumbimby is the home of the conspiracy theorists. You feel comfortable in that environment?
Well, I think there's, probably about 250 diehard conspiracy theorists in Mullumbimby. There's only 5,000 people in Mullumbimby.
Yeah, but you feel comfortable in that hippie environment. I mean, it's a hippie environment, really, isn't it?
And there's also some extraordinarily smart.
I'm not being condescending at all.
Yeah, I feel comfortable in Mullumbimby. You bet.
I mean, the best film in the world this year apparently is Nomadland. So that's all about old hippies, basically. So have you seen it? Yeah, and I don't think it's about old hippies so much. I think it's about one of the many, many, many tragedies of America, about the fact that if you're old and you don't have money, or even if you're just middle class, you're fucked. America is, so much of America is being replicated in Australia, but we're still holding on here to, a little bit of an attachment to the notion of the common good, and we're all in this together and look after your mates. It's 10 times less population. What do I mean? It's 25 million people here. I mean,
apart from that, apart from the sheer numbers, the fact is, we do have a connection to a notion of collective destiny, except the Morrison government doesn't. And in fact, the Liberal Party doesn't in general. It's just a fact. That's their philosophy is more like the American one, which is, everyone for yourself. It's fuck you capitalism.
Well, I mean, still, Australia's just a paradise, in comparison. I lived there for a long time too. I lived in the US for a long time. The competition is just overwhelming. I'm a stand-up comic, and I go and live in America, and in the 1990s, and I realize this incredible weight, that necessities to succeed, and I must say I found it overwhelming. I just found it overwhelming. Going out for auditions for movies, or going out for auditions for whatever, for commercial, whatever it was, trying to survive. It's
yeah, it is.
you don't feel that here. You don't feel that here at all, mate. You don't feel it here at all.
No, although in a way, Australia could do with a bit more, get up and go.
Well, that's because, but we have had it since the Second World War, because of the immigrants from all over the place who've encouraged the Aussies to pull their fingers out, and they have
brought energy, absolutely.
To a greater extent, anyway. I mean, people,
yeah.
Look at the tradies now. They're all, all killing it. They're all absolutely killing it.
Wait, isn't Morrison a tradie? That high business,
Well, he's killing it.
What's that about? Tell me what that's about.
I don't know. I fucking don't know.
All these politicians wear high vest as if they're doing something,
Well, you know why you become a politician? Because you're not good at anything else, I reckon. And
well, in their case, I think there's a whole cohort of politicians called the Liberal Party, basically, whose job it is to funnel our tax money back to their mates, literally.
No, I agree with that. I agree, but also into their pockets.
Well, of course, they're going to get. Well, they get a huge salary, and they get. Blah, blah,
when you've got fuck all, and it's so easy to make money, with a brown paper bag. Like Neville Rand, for instance, who was a totally corrupt politician, left $40 million. So one wonders how.
Why did he leave it? Didn't he have anything to spend it on? Jesus.
Well, he left it to his daughter, who ended up in jail anyway. But
that's right. Oh dear. Yeah. Tragic.
But that's because he was a motherfucker, and he's a motherfucker. But yeah, that's everywhere. I mean, politicians, like rabbis, politicians need to be born rich.
Right. So just back to America and the difficulties of getting anywhere and the competition and all that stuff. I mean, it is also the best as well as the worst of things on earth, right? I mean, the movements that I put in under the heading of the counterculture, in the rubric of the counterculture, revising our way we do everything, the food we eat, the way we live, the way we cooperate, the way we make energy out of the sun instead of out of atom bombs or whatever. These are progressive and wonderful initiatives, and the science behind them and the social and political energy behind them is all originally coming out of America and nowadays China. Yeah. So they do manage to create some great things. Oh, but man, I mean, just the other day up in Uluru, actually, there was this tour guide guy who was telling us about the wonders of astronomy and so on. How up there in the middle, the center deserts of Australia, we have all kinds of technical gadgetry that are part of the world's attempt, scientists of the world, astronomers of the world, attempts to understand the beginnings of the universe and all that stuff. And they are, and Australia has a unique role because we have parts of the country in the red desert that have no lights and no other interferences. Yeah, so you can hear radio signals from 5 trillion miles away, perfectly clearly in the desert up there. Anyway, this guy's talking about all this stuff, and he was an Indigenous bloke, so he's also telling us about astronomy from the point of view of the 60,000 years of his community, looking at stars and learning how to do shit. He then said, there's a lot of money in this, but spent on all these wacky things, but it produces all these phenomenal inventions. NASA did this and that, invented Wi-Fi and all kinds of things. But the fact is...
Hedy Lamarr, actually.
I thought of bringing that up, but I thought I'd had enough of listening to this talk already. So I did Hedy, of course, most amazing story. But, and I think there was an Australian woman who had something to do with it too. But anyway, here's the point. The punchline here is this, that all this money that's spent on defense, so-called, in other words, war, and space as well, And then they try to tell us that this is worth it because we get all these other things, vacuum cleaners or what, all these inventions that we get out of it. How about if we just spent the money on the inventions in the first place? The things, instead of the war machinery invented the internet. Well, somewhat, that's true. But why didn't we just spend the money in the first place figuring out how to make better computers? It was so much more efficient than doing that in the course of killing people. But that's what's happened. So anytime somebody says,
why do they spend? Well, why do they want to kill each other? What is that? What is that about?
A competition for power over other people. That's basically it, and resources. But it's part of the male problem, isn't it? The patriarchy, the male drive to control everybody's lives. Women control creating life; they give birth. Men destroy it. That's part of the story. Not
I agree. Anyway, listen, Phil. Great talking to you, and maybe we'll resume it at another stage.
All right, mate. Good talking to you.
Lovely talking to you. I got Philip coming up now, so I've got Noyce, talk to Noyce. So I'm going to talk to
the other Philip.
Yeah, the other Philip. But lovely talking to you. And it was lovely talking to you up there as well. And
likewise, mate. Then say hello to Phil for me. Yeah.
I will. He already said hello to you. He loves you, mate.
That's right.
He loves you. See you, mate.
Keep it up, mate.
Bye, mate.
Thank you.
Bye, mate.